they watch it back later and get hammered at their own pace.
One sec.
I'm kind of glad about the lineup tonight because it so happens as we can do the 2 Chardonnays together, then the 2 Pinots together, and then the Syrah and the Harrys at the end.
How many glasses do you recommend we pick each?
Well, mate, I'm using separate glasses for everything. So 6 if you've got it. Otherwise, try to get at least 2 because I'm going to try to taste them side by side with Steve.
Wit of rood zijn?
Wit, one is white. We need 8 glasses.
Ik zou gewoon wit beginnen. First white, hè?
Yeah, the 2 Chardonnays first.
Whites. You're gonna get whites. Different whites.
Yeah, but do we do one by one or I
only put 1 and 2 side by side because it's going to be interesting to compare those 2. They're very different from each other. So I think it's going to be a really interesting match.
I'm a bit long.
Already? No.
Okay, let the weekend begin.
How you doing, Robert?
I'm good, mate. How are you?
Oh, not bad, not bad. How's everything?
Pretty hectic. I thought that things couldn't get busier, and they have. It's a little crazy at the moment.
Well, that's don't complain. Well, it's good.
No, it's.
You got a good line. If you got good wines, people buy them.
That's the secret squirrel, Greg.
You know how it is. You got good wines. You've got customers. So sounds good. I'm pleased to hear it.
Yeah, it's been a crazy year, but we're hurtling towards end of year, and I'm off on the Royal Caribbean cruise next week with a bunch of clients.
Where from?
Oh no, it's a cruise into nowhere, and then you come back. So basically, well, the theory is that you split Singapore.
It's in Singapore, yeah.
Yeah, so they cruise into the South China Sea. I'm told it's no more than 6 hours away from Singapore, and then we just drink a whole lot of wine for 4 nights and come back on Monday with a hangover.
How many days? Is this organised by a winery or I've
got a bunch of clients together who wanted to.
Oh, so you've done it. You've organised the wines of the whole lot.
Yeah. So there's a bunch of us going. Because the wine package is not that terrific, so we've actually done something internally.
And they've let you put your own wine on, yeah?
Yeah, it took a bit of arm wrestling, but we got it right.
Yeah, but that's I used to work with a couple of cruise lines, but Silver Seas was the one.
Mediterranean food's probably what I like doing the most. Yeah, but these days for the family and for mates, I sort of cook everything. It's a really lovely kind of relaxation thing now. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing what you can do. Like, like here on my place, I grow everything. Like I've started picking sugar snap peas today. I've got potatoes, the earliest I've ever had them on the river. I've got shelling peas. It's quite bizarre, but I'd probably be nowhere near as good a cook as what you are.
Well, my garden's not anywhere near as good as yours, I'm sure, mate. Yeah.
No. Come on,
Yeah, Greg, I heard about you winning a bloody potato prize or something last year, wasn't it?
I've won a lot. Well, I grow a lot of potato. I grew 2,000 kilos last year.
Didn't you win like the best potato? I'm sure there was a picture.
Come on, I've won a lot of things. Well, not really. My people in my office, they love taking the mickey out of me with potatoes that and my crazy passion to grow fruit and vegetables.
Oh, it's fantastic.
And yeah, that's how I got bitten by the bloody snake. You know,
That's right. That's the story now. It was
that's
you.
the story. I got bitten.
on the snake.
I
Yeah,
got
no,
bitten by a tiger snake picking peaches for my office staff. And
I heard the snake died immediately, though, Greg.
what was that? What did you say, Lou?
I heard the snake died immediately.
Well, it seemed to like the first taste. It wouldn't have a second. And then it probably forgot to realise what was in the what was. Jeez.
There's now an Aboriginal legend about you, actually.
What's this?
Well, you know, the white fella who one day in Wirrabul country, the mother tiger snake came along and bit the nasty white fella and died immediately. It's an analogy and a satire for the whole of white colonialism.
Oh my God. It's there's truth in everything, you know. Anyway, but you know what? We haven't seen a snake this year yet. Haven't seen one.
If I was a snake, I wouldn't come anywhere near you. Bloody hell.
No.
Yeah.
Jeez, Greg,
We haven't
they're
seen
throwing
one,
rocks
Lou.
at you.
I got to tell you, it's unusual. Anyway.
It's 7
All
o'clock. Let's kick this off. Steve, thanks very much for joining us this evening. A little bit of background for those who don't know terribly much about Giant Steps. A bloke called Phil Sexton, who first set up Devil's Lair and then Little Creatures Brewery. And then 1997 started Giant Steps in the Yarra Valley and has taken it to greatness. Many will say that, but for Steve's input, it would never be anywhere close to the success story that it is. Certainly, Steve, under Steve's guidance, that he's pulled down 34 different trophies and more than 100 gold medals. It also has the singular distinction of being in the Wine and Spirits International Competition top 100 for the last 6 years in a row. And as far as I know, it's the only Australian label that's done that. So with great respect and with great pleasure, I'd like to hand you over to Steve to introduce these wines. I'm hoping, Steve, that we can look at them, the two Chardonnays together, then the two Pinots.
Yep.
So I'm particularly interested to compare the Wombat and the Terrapin, just because they are from such completely different sites, right?
That's right. I mean, we make 4 single vineyard Chardonnays and 4 or 5 single vineyard Pinot Noirs. And I guess the thing for us is the winemaking. I'm a chef. My background's in cooking, so we're very much about the ingredients more than we're about the technique. And single vineyard wines, be it Chardonnay or Pinot Noir, are very much about the place that they come from. So the winemaking is very careful. It's pretty old-fashioned, but there's lots of, I guess, detail in trying to really get the best out of our fruit, but without, I guess, interfering with it too much. So our Chardonnay winemaking is literally hand-picking, selecting the best bunches, doing sorting in the vineyard, whole bunch press, completely turbid juice, so no clarification at all. Goes down by gravity, down to French barrels, and they're large oak, so puncheons. And then we pretty much leave them alone to do a completely wild or indigenous fermentation. So every Chardonnay is made the same way. So what we're tasting here if you're comparing the Terrapin and the Wombat Creek, is our first vineyard, arguably our warmest site, at 100 meters of altitude, and then right up to 400 meters of altitude for the Wombat Creek, which is our coolest and last picked. Yeah.
So guys, just Wombat's your number 1 and Terrapin's your number 2.
Oh, great. So we'll do that now.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. It's really interesting just on nosing the two together, just to see the differences. Not really picking up too much of the altitude difference with phenolics, but it's very clear to me that there's more of a pastry, almond kind of baked apples, cinnamon kind of thing going on in the Wombat, whereas the Terrapin speaks to me far more urgently about fruit, peach, pear, stone fruit, lime, possibly. It's giving all of those. So definitely very different points of view just on the first blush. I feel a bit bad because mine's a little cold. I've promised myself to take them out of the fridge at 6 o'clock, and so they slightly. I'm having to work them over a little bit to get them warm enough.
It's always nice to start with them cold and allow them to warm up a little bit, while they're, and obviously the flavors and the aromas are going to evolve a little. But that's a lovely description you did. I love that about the the altitude. 2018 was a relatively warm year for us, and so Wombat Creek does have a bit more of that sort of almond, praline, marzipan character, a little bit of candle wax. Where in the really cool years, it'll see more citrus. But every single year, the Taraford Vineyard does show us versions of stone fruit, whether it's white peach or nectarine. And I think that sort of shows that Central Valley, lower altitude Yarra Valley kind of personality, really. Yeah.
Yeah.
Soils are also very different. That's worth noting. The first wine, the Wombat Creek Chardonnay, is from a very deep red basalt soil, almost terra rossa. And the Taraford is on a very shallow, fairly hungry, what we call Yarra Valley duplex, which is a fairly chunky, hard clay. So, in one case, the Wombat Creek, the vines seem to be doing it fairly easily. And in the Taraford Vineyard, they're doing it pretty tough there. So the vines are responding differently.
It's interesting because just a couple of weeks ago, we looked at the Bindi Costa's Chardonnay 18. And the Taraford speaks to me in the same kind of way in terms of its current construct as it is right now. It's showing that beautiful, luscious, more kind of green lime action, green citrus action than the others. So they definitely compare very differently. I noted that the Taraford is a northeast facing site, but I couldn't pick up anything on Wombat. That high up, does it even matter? It must be almost the top of the range.
It's facing kind of northeast as well. So, it gets the nice morning sunlight. Yeah.
Okay. So probably getting equal access to the sun, but then being very differently interpreted because of altitude and soil. Would that be the right way to frame it?
Really big differences, and they're significant, is the altitude, obviously, because altitude means cooler nights, even if we've got warm days, but much, much cooler nights. And that cool nighttime temperature means we retain a much higher level of acidity. Mm-hmm. And the ripening is obviously happening much more slowly. So there's that going on. But also, I think the soil really is significant. Putting vines in the deep, rich, red basalt that goes down for 9 meters, they do. They're pretty relaxed, and they tend to produce quite large dark green canopies. If you go back to Taraford, where it's on a shallow topsoil going into a bit of this Yarra duplex and then going into a relatively hard clay and mudstone below that, those have to work really hard to find nutrient and to find moisture. And they are responding by setting a much lower crop and also small bunches and smaller berries. Interestingly, both those vineyards are relatively mature. I mean, the Taraford vineyard's now pushing 32 years of age. And the Creek is closer to 40 years of age now. So,
At what stage, Steve, did you start to see those vines kick into gear? I mean, so you weren't with them. You weren't at Giant Steps from '97. I'm not sure what year you joined them, but
in 2003, and picked up the Taraford Vineyard 2004. It was already a producing mature.
Established.
But I'd had the luck of seeing some Wombat Creek fruit way back in 2002 when I worked for another wine company. Even then, that was
So in your opinion, were those vines already at a mature level? I'm very interested when we're looking at these. We did this big retrospective with some Yarra Valley people a couple of weeks ago, and they said they could call it to the year as to when their Chardonnay vines finally seemed to kick into a sphere of serious maturation. And I was wondering if that's something that you had seen as well at Giant Steps.
Absolutely. I've got a bit of a theory about it. It's a personal theory, and it's not at all scientific. It's purely anecdotal. When vineyards hit that sort of 16, 17, 18 years of age, they tend to sort of hit quite a special spot. And I've had the fortune of seeing the Sexton Vineyard from a very young age right through to, now it's sort of going 20, 22 years of age, 23 years of age. And it was that sort of 17, 18, 19, 20, that vine age where they really did hit a sweet spot. And they behave almost like an elite athlete. You know, they really, that is to me their best performing years.
Yep.
They're producing obviously and changing their personality slightly, but they hit their straps at 17, 18. And we've had other vineyards that we've been taking fruit from, the Primavera vineyard, which we're going to taste in the Pinot Noir, and a very similar kind of age progression. Yeah.
So you reckon both Chardonnay and Pinot manifest the same characteristic growth on the same kind of time curve? That's really interesting.
So. Arguably, Pinot's maybe a little bit later, but Chardonnay maybe, you know, sort of 15, 16, 17. Pinot more like 18, 19, 20 years of age. And look, I'm only speaking from experience with vineyards in the Yarra Valley, but I've talked to a few winemaking mates about that, and we sort of share the same theory that there is a sweet spot in that sort of like early adulthood vine age. Hopefully I can stick around long enough to see these vines hit that sort of 40, 50 years of age, but...
There's a question in the private chat, is there a time when Burgundy vines or Chardonnay and Pinot vines get too old in Yarra? Have you seen any instances of that?
Good question. We haven't really got quite enough experience with that one. I mean, the oldest Chardonnay and Pinot vines in the Yarra are probably late 60s.
Yeah.
You know, we're talking probably...
In wine terms, it's not insanely long, and in Pinot terms, that's great. I mean, in Burgundy terms, the French wish they had more vines that old. They had to graft it. And
you know, the French who've been doing this for a while, I think to be classified as a Premier Cru vineyard, it's got to be at least 25 years of age. And I think...
Yeah, but and when it becomes a Premier Cru or Grand Cru, are they allowed to graft onto those vines and stay? That was my point, where this grafting seems to be something which happens a lot in Europe, and I've always wondered how much of an impact that actually makes on the final product.
Good question. We're in the process of replanting a few sites now where we've decided that maybe the clone or the variety in some cases needs a revision. And it's good because it means when we planted vineyards in the Yarra back in the 90s, there was a bit of a theory of wide rows and sort of wide vine spacing. In the vineyards we're planting now, we've come in much closer on our rows, we've come much closer on our vines, so that our density's increased significantly. And I think there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. That's a whole topic in its own. And but I think it's going to be a really lovely sort of next 10, 15 years to see the way they go.
Yeah, for sure. Another question is, these Chardonnays, how do you see them going with age? I guess I'd like to add to that question is, how long before you see these two at a mature level? And then how long will they cruise for? Because I actually think they're going to mature at on different curves. There's no question about that. Structures are very different.
We've been drinking sort of the 2004, 2005 Terraford Chardonnay over the last couple of months, and they look pretty good. They're definitely younger wines. And I guess they're showing a little bit of our winemaking back in that era. We were using small oak rather than we're using much more large oak now. Probably using more batonnage as a winemaking technique back then too, where we're stirring the lees, which I think probably pushes the wines a little bit further forward.
Right.
And winemaking now is probably to sort of hold back on batonnage and pretty much leave the wines alone to rest on lees by themselves.
Okay. It's quite interesting looking at these now 15 minutes into them being in the glass, because there seems to be, with the Wombat, it's progressing more of that waxiness that you referenced a little bit earlier. And it's kind of rounder and fuller and more generous and luscious in the mid palate. It's evolving at a very different pace compared to Terraford. I can see why this got number 42 of the top 100 wines from James Halliday. I think it was last year you gave that award. And then you got a gold at the Royal Melbourne as well for this wine. And I'm really loving its evolution over time. I think it's really cool.
I think it's interesting. The Terraford has this weird ability to sort of stay in suspended animation for quite a few years. Like that, I feel like that 18 Terraford Chardonnay looks exactly the same as when I looked at it 4 or 5 months ago. And,
really?
I feel like it's just in that stage, whereas the Wombat keeps evolving every time we try it. So that's going to be interesting.
Yeah, and I think even in a micro example now, just over this short period of time, the Wombat for me is definitely moving, whereas the Terrafid doesn't seem to be evolving beyond its first blush, if you know what I
Yeah,
mean.
but Rob, isn't that the acid profile? You get in the
Yeah, I
Terrafid,
think so.
you got that acid right down the spine of it, right? Whereas the
Yeah.
Wombat's broader, it's got the shoulders out and going, it's going out that way. Well, the Terrafid's much more linear.
Yeah. And I really love the oiliness in the Wombat. It has this beautiful, I don't know if glycerin is the right word, but wax is probably closer to it. And I'm loving that in my mid palate with the Wombat. I think it's really delicious. And then overlaid with brown spice and maybe a little ginger. I'm really in love with that one tonight.
Yeah, the Wombat's a really interesting vineyard. It was planted back in the mid 80s for sparkling for Domaine Chandon.
Oh,
only in very recent years that we've taken it right back, cut off the cordons, brought it back to 2 small canes, and really brought the canopy down, or I guess the fruiting, the cordon down lower to the ground. And so we've only really seen 3 years of that as table wine up until then. It's always sparkling based. So, you know, we're going on a bit of a journey with that vineyard, and it's pretty exciting. Yeah, we discover something new about it. Yeah,
I think this might be. I mean, we've been marketing the wines with Greg for in Singapore for at least 8 years, but the Wombat, I think maybe we've seen 3 years of it, maybe 4 different years of it so far. Yeah, something like that. And I'm loving the direction that it's going in. It's got this majestic fullness to it, which is richness to it, which is really great.
But yeah, the Terrafid, it's just incredible. It's described often in Australia. I hate using French terms to describe our wines, but it's described as almost Chablizian sometimes.
Yes,
really,
yes. You know, that's a really cool way to note, because with the Wombat, I'm leaning, and there's some real Burgundy files in here tonight, so I'll probably get shut down for saying it, but I'm feeling a lot more Montrachet, sort of that rich kind of, delicately precise Montrachet kind of flavor, warm brown flavor to that. And I think Chablis is the really cool way to define where Terrafid sits. I think it's really great.
Yeah.
Question.
All right. I could bang on all night about this. I'm sure I'm boring everybody maybe with my references, but let's move to the Pinots now. So number 3, Primavera. And number 4 is the Sexton, both 18s. So again, we're looking at very different altitudes. Again, we've got 240 meters with the Terrafid and 130 meters Sexton. So Sexton is marginally higher than the Terrafid, and I guess Primavera is somewhere in the middle. So let's have a look at these two.
Can we have a 2-minute break to get the number 3 and 4?
1 sec, mate. We're just getting the wines.
I thought you Dutch guys were organized. Jeez.
Always the Dutch, right?
Yeah, I know.
Calm down.
By the way, I'm not African, but it doesn't matter if you want to insult me, but it doesn't matter. Sorry.
It was Austin Powers who said, I hate 2 things, intolerance and the Dutch.
Oh, we are really Dutch. Let's finish it first. Huh? Oh, look at this. Now I can hear
There he is.
There he is, the master.
Fantastic.
All
right. We have permission from the Dutch embassy to continue the tasting now. So we're on the Primavera and the Sexton. So Paul, Steve, so what I was quite interested here, again, going back to the soils, from what I was reading, the Sexton is from that sort of difficult kind of thing where there's the roots are really battling to find their nutrition. It's rocky. It's all the stuff that the French say creates great character. So I guess, what would your interpretation be just before we even look at them in terms of the difference between the 2 wines, so we can see if we can identify them with you?
It's almost a similar exercise to the Chardonnay. So I was really pleased to see that we had these 2 to look at after the Chardonnays, because in the Primavera, we're in the red soil again. We're in that same seam of that red basalt that's from volcanic origin about 70 million years ago.
Right. Deep,
rich red soil, almost the color of that wine exchange banner behind your head.
Oh yeah.
That color. And those vines produce lower color but highly perfumed, almost sort of orange peel Campari characters when they're ripe.
Yep.
When we go to the Sexton, down on that sort of shallower topsoil, Yarra Valley duplex gravel, and then into mudstone, where the vines really have to work quite hard again.
Yeah.
Facing north, so they're getting plenty of sunlight, and the flavors are much darker, more brooding. They were sort of talking darker plums and cherries, whereas with the Primavera, more like raspberries, strawberries, and brambles. So, where the difference in the two Chardonnays is certainly significant. I think when you get to the Pinots, the amplitude becomes quite a lot higher and lower.
Yeah.
The difference is
Gotcha.
much more dramatic. Yeah.
The first thing I'm thinking of with the Sexton is there's a producer in Centro Otago called Dr. Splat, and it's a super high vineyard. It's hellishly difficult soils. He's a fantastic winemaker, and like you, he seeks that kind of ultimate soil expression. And I'm getting that overlay, that sort of lilac dust, that dusty kind of initial phenolic with underneath this dark brooding fruit. And I love that sort of interaction of those two influences in the wine. It definitely shows for me really clearly. Whereas the Primavera, that you really nailed it with that orange peel thing. It's something that I've never looked for or seen before in a Pinot, but it's definitely shouted out to me when you mentioned it here tonight.
Yeah, we see, almost a Campari kind of. It's almost like a rose petal, but very dark rose petal character that comes out of the wine. Much of that sort of dried orange as well. We see it each year. Yeah. And back on the Sexton, it tends to sort of produce in the warmer years, and 18 was certainly a warm year, almost a Dutch licorice character as the wine gets a little bit of age. It gets that sort of darker, almost more. It's quite a brooding wine. And in terms of food, I'm always sort of saying the Sexton's the one to have with the charred grilled lamb, veal cutlet, whereas Primavera is much more towards Asian duck pancakes and those kind of flavors. I think. Exactly. So the hoisin flavors, that sort of juicy, oily kind of flavor food would be amazing. Anything with plum, all those sort of flavors would definitely dance around the Primavera really easily. I mean, again, your awards with Primavera, you're in the Halliday Top 100 with this Primavera, number 70 out of 100. There's this notion that one of the writers brought up, and I can really see it here tonight, was comparing the Primavera being about fresh strawberries or freshly cut strawberries, and the Sexton being more about dried strawberries. And for me, it really jumps out at it. Yeah, Lou, you're right. That perfume notion in the Primavera it's just really urgent and like expressive, whereas there's something a little bit more standoffish about the Sexton to start, but I'm really intrigued with it. I think it's wonderful. Would you agree, Steve, that the Sexton is something that might possibly be demonstrate more longevity over time? Is it something that's going to evolve in a different direction? Again, I love being proved wrong in these things, because that would make sense. You would say there's more tannin and more structure and more color in the Sexton, therefore it should, polyphenolics. They age; those wines age more slowly. But the Primavera again just seems to be in this state of suspended animation, and it hasn't really evolved much for the last few years. Whereas the Sexton is evolving. So yeah, I don't know. I love it when wine does weird stuff like that. You didn't know
It's just a good excuse to drink it more regularly. I think that's a fantastic reason.
Look, one thing I want to add too is, again, the winemaking is the control. So this is like a scientific experiment where the variable is the vineyard site. Very simple, arguably the same amounts of whole bunch, whole cluster fermentation, whole berry, wild fermentation, no fining, no filtration, and bottling by gravity. So we're very, very careful about those final stages of the wine's life. So what I hope you're tasting in the bottle is literally just the different sites. Yeah.
It's very exciting to be able to do these sort of tastings, because the notion, you can always look at a vineyard or a site or a cru or what have you, and look at, but being able to see the same winemaker working in the same vintage with different sites is a very exciting and a really unique opportunity. There's not many producers in Oz that do that, now that I'm sort of thinking about it with the single site expression with Pinot and Chardonnay, which are definitely the most maddeningly interesting varietals to look at in that way.
Rob, if I may, I mean, the other thing that you and I have drunk our way through thousands of Pinots over the years, right?
Yeah.
Normally, when we're confronted with a New World Pinot of this colour, we look at each other with deep trepidation and go, uh-oh, is this going to be nothing there?
Yeah.
This thing just explodes with flavour.
Yeah.
Like the colour would tend to indicate, oh, we're going to get a real lightweight, pissy little affair, but it's just all muscle. It's all there. It's great.
Yeah, Lou, again, I love it when, what you're expecting is absolutely not what you get. And I think that's one of the things about Pinot. I often look at Pinots and go, oh, it's a bit pale.
Yeah.
But it's so deceptive, the colour in Pinot. In fact, so deceptive that we don't even worry about it anymore. We just ignore the colour.
Yeah, I remember years ago looking at Pinot and coming to all kinds of unfair conclusions and then being proved horribly wrong later in the piece. It's just one of those crazy attributes of that varietal, for sure.
Well, as we know from Byron, I don't know if Byron's on the call tonight, but
yeah, he is.
Oh, is he? Okay. Well, I'll abuse him for the hell of it. But Byron's probably one of the most respected Burgundy drinkers that we know. And he keeps on lecturing us about what you're looking for in a classic Pinot profile is power without weight.
Yeah.
And to me, the Primavera in particular just encapsulates that completely. You look at it, you think, oh, it's a measly little thing that's going to get sand kicked in its face on the beach. Instead, it's just this.
No chance. Yeah, it's just massive. One of the questions, Steve, from Dave is your winemaking approach the same with all Pinots, or do you answer the call of the vineyard in terms of how you deal with them?
No, I mean, to a degree, we look at every parcel of fruit that comes in, chew the stems. I like as much whole bunch fermentation as we can get away with. So we're aiming to do as much as possible, but it all depends on the stem ripeness of each parcel, and that varies. But generally speaking, we're aiming for about 50% whole bunch, as in 50% of the components are all whole bunch, and 50% of the components that go into the wine will be whole berry. We don't do combination anymore. We do one or the other. And,
okay. So you're committed to one approach rather than mixing them around.
Yeah, we just found that gives us a more pure, pure message from the vineyard, I reckon. Yeah.
Okay. Another question, it's a good one from Tara, is how would the Applejack Pinot, and we sell masses of Applejack. We're about to do the Applejack 19 next week, in fact, after the big suckling win. How would you compare these two to Applejack as if we were tasting it in the sequence now?
Got it here. It's just different again. It's more earthy, brambly, more undergrowth. Probably not quite the perfume heights of the Primavera in terms of that musk and potpourri and rose petal, but it's got it sort of sits comfortably between these two, actually. Funnily enough, it's got the earthiness that Sexton chose, but a different version. It's probably the more complex of the three Pinots. Yeah. One sort of, you sort of can dive into deeper and find more things. Yeah. But I'm kind of glad too that we're looking at these two, because these two are kind of like the bookend. They're
180 from each other, right? It's really cool to see these together. I think the one big takeaway for me with Applejack as well is a highly refined textural notes to it. It's certainly in its sort of 18-month to 2-year age, it just gets this incredible sheen to it, a glossiness to it that I've seen in 16, 17, and 18. It definitely seems to be a stamp of that site.
Yeah, there's always a viscosity or a really interesting mouthfeel of the Applejack, and I don't know where it comes from. It just comes from the vineyard. It's one of those things. We don't do any fining and we don't do any filtration, because I think I've always been of the opinion, and Phil feels very strongly about this too, that putting Yarra Valley Pinot through a filter, you really do take away the kind of soul of the wine. So we've never filtered a Pinot. And I think with the Applejack, there's this, well, with all of our Pinots to a degree, but certainly with the Applejack, there's a viscosity or a slipperiness to it that I think is really that wine. Yes,
it's definitely a style, a house style of that site. And I have to say, consumers love it. Greg and I do the Pinot Palooza every year here, and we pour about, I don't know, 20 to 30 different wines. And it's so interesting for me as a retailer to line up, a fair chunk of our Australian Pinot representation in one room. And I've got to say, over the last 3 years, Applejack has nailed it every single year. It's been absolutely amazing. I don't know, Greg, if you agree, but we've had some. We've actually run out of the wine before anything else. In terms of it's been an amazing lineup. Wines can succeed or fail in that environment, and we have people just drilling the Applejack every single time. It's been
that's really nice to hear.
Very powerful. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a good. Greg's been there.
Yeah.
Greg looks like. Yeah.
Yeah, I've worked side by side with Greg on that, and it's always a hell of a big weekend. In fact, the last time we did it last year, we poured all your wines on the Saturday before the Sunday. So whoever showed up the next day didn't get any bloody wine. So I left Greg to deal with the service problems on that.
What a gentleman. Unbelievable.
All right,
Rob, there's a question from Grant there.
Yeah, I'm just having a look. Before we leave the Pinots, is there a difference in vine age between Sexton and Primavera, the Pinots, Steve?
They're exactly the same age. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Both planted in 97, 98.
Amazing demonstration of characteristics, just so incredibly different.
Yeah.
Great, Grant, I'm not hearing you. I think you're.
I know.
Oh, there you go. Hey. Good to see you. How's Ardmore Park tonight?
Yeah, well, it's beautiful, but we can't.
Battling along, clearly. All right, let's move to the last two. The Terraford Syrah.
Oh, one question.
Oh, yeah, sure. Sorry.
Why did we choose these two specific Pinots for the tasting? I picked them, and the reasoning for that really was I was trying to show two Pinots from the Giant Step stable that were very different in terms of altitude, in terms of how their characteristics would show. I would ideally love to show every Chardonnay and every Pinot that they make in one big tasting, but we'd probably be here all night long. So what we're going to hopefully do is invite Steve to come back and do 18 and 19 Pinots all together. So Applejack, or maybe 4 of the sites, and looking at them vintage by vintage, side by side, which will be super interesting. Yep. So we'll see if we can figure that out. Yeah. All right. So let's get to the last two, the Syrah. You guys got lucky. We landed the 16 instead of the 18 Syrah. So you're seeing something with a little bit more vine age on bottle age on it. Yep. And then the Harry's Monster as the last one.
Hi,
so
Rob.
what I wanted to, sorry.
Can you hear me now, Rob?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, finally. Steve, come to say hello.
It's good to see you, mate.
What's your Grant? Put him on.
And what was this about business calls getting in the way last week? We can't have that, mate. We can't have that.
No, but I had to cancel my business call just so I could be on the Zoom tonight with Steve. So.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. Thanks for being here. All right, let's look at this Terraford Syrah. So interestingly enough, the 16 and the 18, Steve, both got 95 from Halliday. Hugh and Hook also gave this a 95. What I wanted to ask you is, do you see much evolution over time with climate change and Syrah in Yarra Valley? Are you starting to see the impacts of that?
A good question. We have planted a bit more Syrah, and we've also planted Grenache, some Carignan, a little bit of Mourvedre over on the vineyard, just to sort of have a look ultimately at what a Rhone blend might look like. Mm-hmm. We'll always make them separately and work out some kind of blend at the end.
The back, yeah.
But yeah, ultimately the Terraford red wine will be a blend of those varieties. Certainly always Syrah dominant. There's also Viognier there as well, which always really tweak the perfume.
That's interesting because I'm not picking up the sort of the kind of killer-esque Viognier impact, that sort of really exotic kinkiness, but it's definitely a part of that in the nose and on the palate.
Yeah.
What sort of percentage are you kicking in?
Yeah, we're only talking about probably it's probably 0.5%, if any percentage. Yeah, but it is an important component, and I think you know, it's very much a year dependent thing too, the Syrah. Like in the cooler years, we'll get a bit more pepper, and in the warm we get a bit more of that brambly, you know, Satsuma red plum. And you've got the 15, is that right, over there?
16.
16, oh great, yeah, it's a beautiful one.
Yeah.
I've actually got the
Just
18.
glorious. It's in a really special place. I don't think I've seen this for at least a year or 18 months or so. And I'm loving the direction that it's going in. It's kind of gathering in majesty and structure. It's really great.
And, you know, the Syrah does go on a really lovely kind of voyage as it ages. It definitely is more than the Pinots, probably, you know, every year or every 6 or 8 months, that wine does take on another level of savoury, a bit more of the undergrowth, a bit more earthiness. There's a little bit of whole bunch always in the Tarapid Syrah, and that tends to come out a little bit more of that sort of spice, I suppose, really, you know, almost a juniper berry, a bit of a Campari spice that sort of tweaks around the background there too. So,
but what I really love about these cool climate Syrahs is the slinky kind of effortless tannic structure. You know, there's just no hard work at all. One just lies back and thinks of England when you drink them. They're really amazing.
Soft and viscous, and very rarely more than medium bodied. They'll never be full bodied wines. And
That's sort of deceptive because it has a very big point of view nonetheless. I mean, there's no question that it's easy on the palate and easy on the nose, but it really has a gravitas about it, especially now. It's definitely, Lou's made the point that there's loads of menthol on the nose. Is that a function of cool climate phenolics?
Yeah, perhaps it's also a little bit of that whole bunch, probably just pushing that a little bit further. Yeah.
Right. But what's interesting about the whole bunch approach is you're not getting the grippy, chalky kind of tannic action that comes from a whole bunch traditionally in a warmer climate. You're getting something that's wholly more refined, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I learned to make wine in the Beaujolais back in the late 80s, and everything was whole bunch over there. And so, you know, I love that technique of having 100% whole bunch where the bunches are actually sitting on top of each other doing a fermentation inside the berries themselves. So you haven't actually wine macerating on stems, whereas you would have that if you were doing a partial whole.
That's very interesting. Okay, so it's a slightly different finesse to the technique.
That's right, yeah, and it's particularly why we do it here, and I think you avoid that kind of really green cutting kind of tannin that you get from whole bunches inside the fermentation itself.
I'm very excited.
Well, that's the thing. These tannins are extraordinarily soft for a Victorian Syrah.
Look, Lou, when you do that whole bunch or, you know, carbonic maceration, at some level, it does produce a mouthfeel and viscosity. We don't have a huge amount of chalky tannin in the area. We tend to get soft tannins and not in particularly high concentration. So I find that carbonic maceration tends to add a layer of glycerol, that velvety mouthfeel.
Yes. There's definitely glycerol action in this. There's no question about that. Yeah.
So
when you compare this to, say, a Dalwhinnie or even the Bindi, it's much more approachable. It's much softer.
Yeah. There's a certain refinement, Lou, to this. I'm thinking about the Dalwhinnie, but it's also a very different region because Dalwhinnie's Heathcote, right? So it's got a prima facie is going to have a different point of view to it. I just like the finish on this. There's a kind of sexy swagger to the palate that I think is really, really great.
Yeah, I don't know. We've never really promoted the Shiraz in the past because it's been, you know, sort of overwhelmed by the Pinot and the Chardonnay. But this will find.
This is pretty special. Yeah, this is pretty cool.
I'd have to just say it's a Syrah or a Shiraz made by a Pinot maker.
Yeah. That's exactly what Mike said at Bindi. Like, there's the Burgundy winemakers bring a certain something special to Syrah.
Why Harry's Monster? Why the name Harry's Monster?
Well, I thought it might have something to do with the royal family not liking vegan, but that might be inappropriate.
No, it's Harry is Phil's son, and way back in the early days of the vineyard, he was convinced the Cabernet and the Merlot were all planted up on the very top north hill of the vineyard, so you know, quite high, quite rocky. And I think the story goes that Harry was convinced there were monsters up in that part of the vineyard, so he'd never go there.
Oh, that's so sweet. Yeah, that's brilliant.
All
Merlot and the Cabernet and the Petit Verdot and the Cabernet Franc that comes from that hill just became known as Harry's Monster.
Harry's Monster. So does it stay as a blend predominantly driven by Cabernet? I guess that's dependent on the volume of vines that you got, or is it something that you mess around with vintage to vintage?
It's generally slightly more Merlot dominant, interestingly. Yeah.
Oh,
like Merlot 55% and then Cabernet and then a little bit of, Petit Verdot. We used to have Franc in there as well. We haven't got Franc anymore, but we've just planted some new clones in Malbec. Which is pretty
okay. Awesome.
In the future, there'll be a bit of Malbec. Join the family.
Oh, that's great. I'm a massive fan of Cabernet Franc. That's my South African roots calling. We produce lots of it there, and so I'm an avid follower of that. I think it's interesting that Halliday has given Harry's a bigger rating than the Syrah, but also I'm guessing the Syrah's got that extra 2 years under its bonnet, and it's just looking so special right now. Greg tells me we've only got 5 dozen of that Syrah in stock, so we'll definitely work on that, Steve, because I think it's in a really cool place right now. So Greg, thanks for sending the wrong vintage. It ended up being fortuitous.
I want to drink it myself, Robert.
Yeah, it's so fantastic.
You can blame it on the snake if you like, Greg.
I'll cane the staff tomorrow.
So before we let you go, are there any more questions from anybody tonight?
I've got one broader question, Steve. You've added on these other vineyards. What's the formula? I mean, when you look at acquiring another parcel, what are you looking for? I mean, are you looking to broaden the portfolio? So you're looking for a particular type of grape variety, or what's the formula that you use when you're looking at every?
To be single vineyard, I'll just give you a really quick take on how we make wine. But every single parcel of fruit we bring in is treated like that's the only wine we're going to make. So it gets everything the white gloves treatment, and we taste it a number of times during the year. And if it's got personality and quality, it gets sort of pulled forward for single vineyard as an option. And I guess a lot of the Primavera, for example, used to be part of our blend, but after a couple of years, we realised there was something quite special there. So it started to sort of get a look into single vineyard because it had not only sort of quality and interest, but it had this sort of incredible personality that we saw every year. So that's the hallmarks to me of a single vineyard wine.
Can it stand alone, is what you're saying?
That's it. Yeah, it's got to stand alone. It's got to sort of, say, this is me, and it's also, but it's got to look like a really fine Yarra Valley Pinot.
What was your thinking in terms of your drive into New Zealand, for example? Was that a geo-insurance, a sort of?
Look, it was purely a curiosity for Pinot. I mean, we're making a Tasmanian Pinot now as well.
Yes, we saw that. Yeah.
Pinot in Australia, you kind of. You've got to have a look down there, that's for sure.
Well, mate, it's interesting because so many big hitters are moving into Tassie. I mean, I read last year that Brown Brothers now has started to acquire properties, and just about everybody is getting into Tasmania, which kind of scares me because prima facie, it's a kind of expensive place to buy wine. But there seems to be this over exuberance from a production point of view for people to get a stake in what Tasmania is about. Which is really
there's a bit of an obsession with most Pinot producers to go as cool as possible, therefore go as high as you possibly can, or go as far south as you possibly can.
Right.
So, we're certainly going up the hill looking for good vineyard sites at the moment in the Yarra, and we're sourcing fruit from the Coal River Valley, which is about as far south as you can go in this country. So. Yeah.
There's a question from Scott about the Americans bloody arriving. So what's the feeling about that? I guess it's a tough question to ask because one never knows. Is that something that's going to open up the American market more for you? I mean, they have phenomenal global distribution.
Makes
what's
sense.
your feeling about it?
It's a big market over there, and those guys, certainly philosophically, we're very much aligned. They're a family-owned company, and they are obsessed with vineyards like we are, and they're constantly curious too. So
Well, the one thing, if I was an investment banker, which I'm light years away from being, I would suggest to my clients that it's a very good idea to buy giant steps right now, because if Jackson opens up the channels into the US, the price of your wines have to go up. Just thinking about the global recognition, you're on major international lists these days. Thanks to you, you've created the attraction of suckling and very, very important wine writers. And so I want to say to my clients tonight, buy these wines at these prices, because I'm concerned that in 2 to 3 years' time, we're going to be charged a lot more for these, as global demand, as you guys reach the world marketplace with Jackson. I think it's a great thing for Giant Steps, for us as consumers of brilliantly made wines at ridiculously reasonable pricing. I've got a sneaky feeling that might change in the long term.
Well,
that's my sales pitch anyway.
No, look, I guess the thing about single vineyard wines is, and this is around the world, not just Giant Steps, but they're always going to be limited. You know, being by nature a single vineyard is only ever a small plot. So I think if, we have people that consistently buy Applejack Pinot because that's their vineyard, they're into it. And, I think that's kind of the way it'll go in the future. People will go, I follow Giant Steps, and of my Giant Steps vineyards, I like Applejack the best, or whatever.
Oh yeah, it's like New Zealand versus Australia in the rugby. You got to pick a side, and you can never make it. You can't change the team, or you lose your inheritance. I came late to the game, but I've learned that now. You got to pick your Giant Steps vineyard and you run with it. For example, Tara, I think, has bought Applejack from us since the very first day we showed it. I love that people kind of. I mean, for me tonight, the Wombat is something that's invigorated my interest in that site. I thank you so much for that. It was really, really super.
Wombat Creek, Steve, where's that located? Sorry, I missed that earlier on.
Right up the top of it. It's as high as you can go in the Yarra Valley in terms of vineyard planting. So 420 metres up above Gladdesdale. So sort of heading towards Warburton. Right up the hill there. Yeah, it's out in the wilderness. It's an incredible place. It's almost in temperate rainforest country. Yeah.
Wine.
Yeah, it's a great place.
Steve, sorry, I might have missed it, but where did you say the Harry's Monster fruit comes from exactly?
That's all from the Sexton Vineyard, on the top of the hill facing due north. Yeah. Yeah, it'll always be Sexton Vineyard, Harry's Monster. Yeah.
There's apparently a monster up there, so it has to be.
Is Harry joining the business?
Harry's a very accomplished brewer. He's actually running the brewery down here next to the winery at the moment. And
that's fantastic.
He's a great bloke, but he's a mad brewer. Yeah.
Oh, really? That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, next time we do a drive-by in the Yarra, we'll come visit you both. Thank you so much for coming tonight, Steve.
We'll start traveling again, Steve.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for coming, everybody. It's been a fantastic night. I'll advertise to you guys first about the retrospective when